In the final months of World War I, a single day changed everything. On August 8th, 1918, the Allies launched a massive offensive that shattered German defences, sent thousands of enemy soldiers into retreat, and forced Germany onto the path of total defeat. This was the Battle of Amiens, the beginning of the end. Welcome to ASMR War History. If you enjoy deep dives into the great battles of the past, please like and subscribe to support the channel. With that out of the way, let's start off tonight's shorter video with an overview of the battle. The Battle of Amiens marked the beginning of the final Allied offensive of World War I. On the morning of August 8th, 1918, a massive assault was launched that would become known as the 100 Days Offensive, the campaign that would ultimately bring the war to an end. What followed was one of the most stunning advances of the entire conflict. In a single day, Allied forces pushed forward more than 11 kilometres, around 7 miles, dealing a devastating blow to the German army. At the heart of this offensive was General Henry Rawlinson's British Fourth Army, which included the elite Australian Corps under Lieutenant General John Monash and the battle-hardened Canadian Corps led by Lieutenant General Arthur Currie. Together these forces, supported by General Marie-Eugène Debonnais's French First Army, delivered an overwhelming strike using carefully coordinated infantry, artillery, tanks and air power to crush German resistance. The impact was immediate. German morale crumbled, and thousands of soldiers surrendered in droves, unwilling to continue a fight they now saw as unwinnable. The sheer scale of the defeat led German General Erich Ludendorff to describe August 8th as the Black Day of the German Army, a moment of irreversible decline for his forces. The battle also marked a turning point in modern warfare, as armoured vehicles played a key role in breaking enemy lines, ushering in a new era of mechanised combat. Now let's rewind a bit and see what led to this epic battle. In the early months of 1918, the German army launched a desperate bid to end the war on its terms. On March 21st, they unleashed Operation Michael, the first in a series of massive offensives aimed at driving the Allies back along the Western Front. With Russia now out of the war following the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, the Germans had shifted hundreds of thousands of troops westward, gaining a brief but crucial advantage in manpower and firepower. This was their moment, a final gamble to break the deadlock. Their plan was simple: strike hard and fast, overwhelming British and French forces before American reinforcements could arrive in full strength. But the offensive stalled near Arras, and despite desperate attempts to push forward, German momentum slowed. Their last major push toward the strategic rail hub of Amiens was met with fierce resistance. On April 4th, British and Australian troops held the line at Villers-Bretonneux, stopping the German advance just short of their objective. Over the next few months, Germany launched additional offensives: Operation Georgette in April, Operation Blücher York in May, Operation Gneisenau in June, and Operation Marne-Reims in July. Each attack gained ground, but none delivered the decisive blow Germany needed to win the war. And time was running out. By mid-July, Germany's temporary advantage was gone. Their troops were exhausted, their supplies running low, and the Allied lines still held strong. Then, on July 15th, the Allies struck back at the Second Battle of the Marne. General Ferdinand Foch, now leading the combined Allied forces, saw his opportunity. His counterattack shattered German forces, forcing them to retreat north. For the first time in years, the Allies were no longer just holding the line, they were going on the offensive. On July 23rd, after the Allied victory at the Battle of Soissons, Marshal Ferdinand Foch revealed his strategy. His plan aimed to eliminate the German threat to Amiens by clearing the Saint-Mihiel salient and freeing critical railway lines from enemy shellfire. Meanwhile, the British already had their own plans in motion. Field Marshal Douglas Haig had given General Henry Rawlinson's 4th Army responsibility for the sector near the Somme. On the left flank, Lieutenant General Richard Butler's 3rd Corps held the line, while to the right, Lieutenant General John Monash commanded the Australian Corps, linking up with the French forces to the south. By the end of May, all Australian infantry divisions were under one command for the first time on the Western Front. Through a series of well-executed counterattacks, the Australians not only secured vital ground, but also tested new tactics that would soon be used on a much larger scale. The mastermind behind the attack was Monash, whose success at the Battle of Amiens just weeks earlier had proven his mastery of modern warfare. He combined infantry, artillery, tanks, and aircraft in a precise and coordinated assault, demonstrating that victory did not require overwhelming numbers, but rather superior tactics and timing. Haig later recorded in his diary that Monash had all the threads of the operation in his hands. Rawlinson submitted Monash's strategy to Haig, who in turn presented it to Foch. A meeting on July 24th confirmed the plan, but introduced one challenge. Foch insisted on including the French First Army in the offensive. Rawlinson opposed this, as the French lacked tanks and would need an artillery bombardment before attacking, which would ruin the element of surprise. A compromise was reached. The French would join the assault, but their attack would begin 45 minutes after the British and Commonwealth forces had already engaged. To keep ahead of the enemy's movements, the date of the offensive was moved up from August 10th to August 8th. With the battle plan finalised on July 21st, Rawlinson met with his corps commanders: Monash, Lieutenant General Arthur Currie of the Canadian Corps, and Lieutenant General Charles Kavanagh of the Cavalry Corps. For the first time in the war, the Australians and Canadians would fight side by side in a major offensive. The success at Amiens had already proven that surprise and precision could defeat even the most entrenched German defences. Instead of the usual days-long preliminary bombardment that alerted the enemy to an attack, the assault would begin with artillery fire at the exact moment the infantry and tanks advanced. The firepower assembled for the offensive was staggering. Over 1,300 field guns and howitzers, supported by nearly 700 heavy artillery pieces, would create a rolling barrage ahead of the advancing troops. British innovations in sound ranging and aerial reconnaissance allowed them to map enemy positions with pinpoint accuracy, eliminating the need for ranging shots. Major General C.E.D. Budworth, Monash's senior artillery officer, developed a timetable that ensured nearly every German gun in range would be hit the moment the attack began. The offensive also saw an unprecedented use of tanks. Over 580 armoured vehicles, including Mark V tanks and the faster Mark A Whippet tanks, would lead the advance. The Canadians and Australians were each assigned an entire tank brigade, while the Cavalry Corps received 2 battalions of fast-moving armoured support. Maintaining secrecy was essential. To deceive German intelligence, the Allies moved the Canadian Corps from Flanders to Amiens without detection, an impressive feat of logistical precision. A small detachment was sent north to Ypres, complete with wireless signals and casualty clearing stations, to convince German spies that the Canadians were still preparing for battle in Flanders. Even the soldiers themselves were given strict orders to refer to the attack as a raid rather than an offensive. A final warning was pasted into orders given to the troops. 3 simple words: keep your mouth shut. The stage was now set. The Allies had a plan unlike anything seen before in the war. If executed correctly, it would not only break the German lines, but shatter their morale. By late July, the tide of war was shifting. Though the German army was still mounting offensives, the balance of power was beginning to tilt in favour of the Allies. Reinforcements poured in. fresh American divisions arriving on the Western Front, British troops transferred from home defences, and forces redeployed from the Sinai and Palestine campaign. The German High Command sensed that a defensive phase might be approaching, but misjudged where the next major Allied assault would take place. They believed the French would strike in the east, perhaps at Saint-Mihiel or Reims, and that the British would attack near the Lys or at Albert. Amiens, however, was not seen as a likely battleground. This miscalculation worked in the Allies' favour. To keep their enemies guessing, the Allies launched localised counteroffensives along various fronts, improving their defensive lines while also drawing German attention away from Amiens. Artillery and air bombardments remained constant across multiple sectors, and troop movements were carried out only at night. During the day, false manoeuvres were staged to further disguise the true intent of the attack. The German defences east of Amiens were held by the Second Army under General Georg von der Marwitz. In total, 6 divisions were positioned along the line, with 2 more facing the French to the south. Crucially, only 2 reserve divisions stood ready to reinforce the sector in the event of an attack. On August 6th, an unexpected German assault caused brief concern among the Allies. The German 27th Division, an elite formation trained in stormtrooper tactics, launched an attack north of the Somme just days before the planned Allied offensive. They managed to push forward nearly 800 yards, disrupting the very sector where the British and Commonwealth forces were set to attack. Their assault was in part retaliation for an earlier trench raid by the 5th Australian Division on the night of July 31st. A daring incursion that had captured many German prisoners. By the morning of August 7th, the German division had withdrawn back to its original position, but the brief engagement forced last-minute adjustments to the Allied battle plan. With secrecy still a top priority, another measure was put in place to ensure the approaching tanks remained undetected. Their deep mechanical rumble could have easily betrayed the attack before it even began. To mask the sound, bombers would fly repeatedly up and down the German lines, their engines producing a similar low-frequency drone. The task fell to twin-engine Handley Page bombers, aircraft whose roar would blend with the noise of the tanks below. However, on the night before the battle, the air crews faced an unexpected obstacle: dense, unseasonal fog. Conditions were too hazardous to order a full squadron into the air. Instead, volunteers were called for, and 2 pilots from Squadron 207, Captains Gordon Flavel and William Peace, stepped forward. They flew their mission despite the dangers, successfully covering the movement of the tanks below. For their courage, both men were awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. In the early morning darkness of August 8th, 1918, a thick fog settled over the battlefield. At precisely 4:20 a.m, the British Fourth Army, under General Henry Rawlinson, launched its assault. The British Third Corps advanced north of the Somme, while the Australian Corps struck at the centre and the Canadian Corps attacked to their right. Further south, the French First Army, commanded by General Marie-Eugène Debeney, joined the offensive, beginning their advance 45 minutes later, supported by 72 Whippet tanks. Though the Germans had been on alert, they expected retaliation for their attack on August 6th, not an all-out offensive. Their forces were caught completely off guard. So complete was the surprise that German artillery only opened fire 5 minutes after the attack began, and even then, they shelled positions the Allies had already abandoned. 7 divisions led the charge. British, Australian and Canadian troops surged forward, supported north of the river by American National Guard units from the 33rd Infantry Division. By 7:30 a.m, the Allies had overrun the first German defensive line, advancing nearly 4 kilometres. The second line, another 3 kilometres deeper, fell just over an hour later. At 8:20 am, fresh divisions pushed through the initial breach. The Australian 4th and 5th Divisions, along with the Canadian 4th Division, continued the assault. The final phase of the attack was meant to be supported by infantry carrying Mark 5-star tanks, but the advance had been so swift that the infantry reached their objectives without them. Now, the cavalry entered the fray. One brigade pushed forward on the Australian front, while 2 cavalry divisions rode through the Canadian sector, exploiting the breach. Above them, aircraft of the newly formed Royal Air Force harassed retreating German forces, ensuring they could not regroup. By 11 am, the Canadian and Australian forces had shattered German defences, pushing the front line nearly 5 kilometres forward. The attack had been so overwhelming that German officers and staff were captured still seated at their breakfast tables. By nightfall, a gap 24 kilometres long had been ripped open south of the Somme. Not every sector advanced at the same speed. North of the river, the British Third Corps struggled with difficult terrain, limited tank support, and lingering disruptions from the German attack 2 days prior. While they secured their first objectives, they were held up at the Chipilly Spur, a 75-foot-high ridge near the village of Chipilly. To the south, the French made significant gains. They launched their own attack, capturing Moreuil by 9:30 am. After a prolonged artillery bombardment, French forces advanced, seizing Mézières and Fresnoy. The French suffered 3,500 casualties, but took over 5,000 German prisoners. By the end of the day, the Allies had pushed up to 16 kilometres into enemy territory. The Fourth Army alone had suffered 12,000 casualties, but the Germans had fared far worse. Over 30,000 German soldiers had been lost in a single day, including 15,000 taken prisoner. At German headquarters, panic set in. General Paul von Hindenburg noted how the Allies had used speed and surprise to devastating effect, isolating German command positions and preventing reinforcements from reaching the front. But it was General Erich Ludendorff who grasped the full gravity of the situation. He later described August 8th as the Black Day of the German army, not because of the ground they had lost, but because the will to fight was breaking. As German officers tried to rally retreating troops, they were met with shouts of, "You're prolonging the war!" and taunts of "blackleg" from reserves still marching toward the front. The battle had engulfed 5 German divisions, leaving them shattered. By nightfall, the Canadians had advanced 13 kilometres, the Australians 11, the French 8, and the British over 3. The offensive pressed on into August 9th, but the stunning momentum of the first day had begun to slow. The initial success had driven the Allied forces far beyond their supporting artillery, leaving advancing troops exposed. The fleet of more than 500 tanks that had been so crucial to breaking the German lines was now nearly exhausted. By the 4th day, only 6 remained in battle-ready condition. On the Canadian front, logistical issues mounted. Narrow, congested roads and breakdowns in communication prevented the British 32nd Division from advancing quickly enough to maintain the rapid pace of the attack. Meanwhile, Chipilly Spur remained firmly in German hands. This ridge provided an ideal defensive position, allowing German machine gunners and artillery to pour devastating fire down onto Allied troops, pinning down the Australian Corps across the Somme at Hamel. The job of taking Chipilly Ridge fell to the men of the 33rd United States Infantry Division. At 5:30 p.m, 3 battalions of American doughboys launched their assault. Under relentless German fire, they pressed forward, refusing to be driven back. By the end of the day, the Americans had taken the northern half of the ridge and the southern edge of Grosser Wood. The next day, they pushed deeper, securing the rest of the forest and capturing 700 German prisoners, 30 artillery pieces, an enemy aircraft, and more than 100 machine guns. During this assault, Corporal Jake Alex, a Serbian immigrant from Kosovo, found himself in command of his platoon after all his officers had been killed. Without hesitation, he led his men against a heavily fortified German machine gun nest. Single-handedly, Alex stormed the position, killing 5 enemy soldiers and capturing 15 prisoners. For his actions at Chipili Ridge, he became the second American soldier of the war to receive the Medal of Honor. By August 10th, signs emerged that the Germans were withdrawing from the salient they had gained during Operation Michael. Official reports later confirmed the extent of the Allied success. By August 27th, nearly 50,000 German prisoners had been taken, along with 500 captured artillery pieces. Even as tank support dwindled, the British Fourth Army had advanced 19 kilometres into enemy territory by August 13th. At this stage, Allied commanders faced a critical decision. Marshal Ferdinand Foch urged Field Marshal Douglas Haig to continue the offensive, pressing the advantage, but Haig believed that the troops needed time to regroup. Instead, he planned a fresh assault, one that would fall to General Julian Byng's Third Army in the region between the Ankara and the Scarpe. This new offensive would begin on August 21st, setting the stage for the Second Battle of the Somme. The Battle of Amiens was more than just another engagement on the Western Front. It was a turning point in the tempo of the war. Since the opening days of the conflict, Germany had sought victory through movement, launching the Schlieffen Plan in an attempt to sweep through Belgium and France. But the race to the sea had brought that momentum to a halt, trapping both sides in years of brutal trench warfare. The German Spring Offensive of early 1918 had once again given Germany the initiative, but that too had begun to falter. Now, with the battle at Amiens, the tide had shifted completely. For years, trench lines had been nearly impregnable, but at Amiens, the Allies demonstrated that these fortifications could be cracked wide open. The difference lay in the tools of modern war, where the British Third Army, attacking without tanks, struggled to make an impact. The British Fourth Army, supported by fewer than 1,000 tanks, shattered German defences and drove deep into enemy territory. British war correspondent Philip Gibbs captured the moment's significance in his dispatches. On August 27th, he described the transformation taking place. "The enemy is on the defensive. The initiative of attack is so completely in our hands that we are able to strike him at many different places." But the true change, he noted, was not just on the battlefield. It was in the minds of the soldiers. "On our side," he wrote, "the army seems to be buoyed up with the enormous hope of getting on with this business quickly. And on the other side, the Germans were no longer fighting for victory. They no longer have even a dim hope of victory on this Western Front," Gibbs observed. "All they hope for now is to defend themselves long enough to gain peace by negotiation." The Great War was not yet over, but after Amiens, its end was no longer a distant dream. The Allies had seized the initiative, and for the first time in years, the path forward was clear. The long, grinding stalemate of trench warfare was breaking, and the final push to victory had begun. Thank you for joining me on this journey through history. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing for more ASMR war history. Your support helps keep these stories alive. And as always, sleep well, my friends.